Hello and welcome to Toya, Who the Fuck Are You? I am your host, Toya, and I'm going to get started. So on last week, I gave you all a sneak peek on the objective of the podcast. So where, I look to discuss and explore my journey in understanding truly who the fuck I really am and where I want to be. When we last met, I've explained my desire to explore my evolution, given the recent change, life changes that have given, me kind of a time to pause and recollect and allow kind of a reset. And so the more I reflect, the more, I feel like I know who I am in regards of spirituality, sexuality, but as an individual, as a woman, there are moments where I over-identify with roles, certain roles. And so I kind of want to unpack that more because I know if I experience, there are others out there that probably experience the same as well. So first, I would say I have the role of being an older sister as well as, of course, a daughter. And previously a wife where I engrossed myself in the growing with someone, I realized I had tethered myself to that person. But I always took, pride in my role as a project manager, and you're going to hear me talk about that, throughout the podcast. And I feel like I placed a heavy emphasis on the career, and I felt that I did so because it was safer. It was easier to explain. When I was single, it was kind of the reason as to why I was single. When I had challenges in my marriage, it was a reason as to why I was having those challenges in my marriage, or it gave me kind of an outlet, right? My career gave me an escape. And so I kind of used it as a shield. And so looking back, I remember, a while ago, my mom, this was right at the passing of my stepfather, and it was a sudden death. And she was faced with a similar situation where, someone she was planning her life with, just abruptly was gone. And so her words to me were, kind of deafening, but she said that she was always someone else longer than herself. And when she explained it to me at the time, I didn't really understand it, but then I also feel like I didn't really appreciate it. But I did listen, right? And I did so empathetically, excuse me. Because after all, this is my mom. This is a sudden loss. This is a blow to our family, and we're just trying to make sense of it. But she explained to me that she's been a mom longer than herself. And she kind of paused. And I remember she said, she had me when she was in her early 20s, and it was like the two of us for 10 years, and I did spend a lot of my time with my grandmother. And then I spent summers with my grandparents on my dad's side. But for the most part, it was a lot of time between she and I. And so she was always my mom. And then she had, she got married. She had my middle sister. And then, got married again and had my baby sister. And so there's a 10-year and a 15-year age difference between my sisters and I. And so she was a wife for 15 years, with my stepfather, and she was a mother. So her priority was always her family, always making sure her husband and kids were taken care of. Her plans always revolved, around someone else. And as she was explaining it to me, I just didn't understand, because it's like, you're a whole human being. How can you say, you lost your identity? You didn't know who you were. And she explained it. She's like, from the food she ate and cooked, it depended upon others, how she planned her day. She always had to consider others, their lives, their, activities, so that she knew how to plan hers. And then, as she was going through this life, going through the process, her partner in life just abruptly passes away. No longer there. Plans of the future gone. And then in parallel, we were growing up. My sisters and I, we were growing up. We were living our lives. We were becoming an empty nest, or her home was becoming an empty nest. And so now she had to figure out who she was. And I remember the first time she had to drive herself. That was just, it was tough for her because my stepfather always done it for her. He always drove her. So it's the simple things and, and understanding how quickly you can lose yourself. And now she had to figure out who she was. She was no longer a wife. And unfortunately, she had to begrudgingly assume the new role of widow. She now has to heal and at the same time get to know herself again. And of course, this is where her story, kind of continues. But again, that was something that I kind of always thought about. And, now she's been a widow longer than she's been a wife. And, it's been 15 years since that conversation. And it's something that has always stuck, but always in the back of my mind, And I just always remember just leaving that conversation. Like, how do you not know who you are? How do you lose yourself in, someone? And of course, fast forward, here I am capturing my journey as I am starting the process. And so learning from it. So I can tell you it does happen quickly, where you don't see where you lose yourself and you become what you think others need to be. One thing I always like to say, and you'll hear me say it over and over again with this podcast, it's my experience. So I can only explain my experiences. I am only an expert on my life. And so one thing I will say, looking back, I've always worked and I've always worked hard. I took pride in my work. I always felt like it was a reflection of who I was as a person. Believe it or not, thinking about it, I have been working since the age of 12. So it kind of explains why I'm so tired. But I worked since the age of 12. I was cleaning and dusting shelves at a neighborhood gas station my grandmother worked at. Also, I was a babysitter. At the age of 11, I was an unpaid babysitter. But with that job, with that role, I loved it. Being the older sister gave me such an indescribable feeling, such a pride that I just don't know how to explain. I felt like I have purpose. And, with my sister, I had to be the best role model for her. She was always a happy baby, always laughing. And so I felt that God gave me a special assignment. And so I took it seriously. I babysat, I cooked. I cleaned, let's be honest. I never cooked. That was a little too much at the time for me. But I took pride in supporting and guiding and comforting her. And also, just helping my mom out. And then again, when my mom got married, I was 15 and she had another kid. And I'm thinking, holy meatballs, what the French toast, Cal? Like, another kid? Like, I'm 15 years old. Like, you should be done. And I'm struggling with my hormones, with my puberty, boys. Oh, God, I was boy crazy. Peer pressure in high school. I think I was a sophomore at the time. And the high school drama. And so my baby sister and I are 15 years apart. And so whereas my middle sister, we were, it was a 10-year difference. But with the 15-year-old age difference between my baby sister and I, it was different. It felt like she was my responsibility. Even though she was not my child, she was my responsibility. And I will honestly say she was probably the best birth control my mom could ever give me. Because when you have to babysit at 15, it's a time suck. It makes you realize, thinking, about having kids. And so I was now tethered to two. I had two sisters whom I was thankful for, but I was exhausted from. And I felt like all I did, mind you, I'm a teenager, all I did was I babysat, I cleaned, I babysat and cleaned. And while my friends were out having fun, dating, going to the mall, the movies, I was working. I was working for free. And then, of course, I did have a job in high school where I was, I worked for Subway. I was a sandwich artist, and I took that seriously too. Even to this day, when I go to Subway, that was my first real job, and I always talk about it. But I worked, and I always knew that the fun will come later. And boy, did it do. It came during my college days. And that's where I lost my freaking mind. So I escaped my life as a babysitter. I was a college student. I had this new sense of freedom. But at the same time, I lost my fucking mind. Because it was freedom that I never experienced, but I was not prepared for. So I stumbled, and I stumbled a lot, and I recovered, and I stumbled. So again, college, kind of on my own, navigating through life. At this time, I was working as a pharmacy technician, and there it goes again, right? I was working fucking full-time job while going to school full-time. And, again, that common theme of I worked. And so I realized I didn't really have an identity. My friends, they were very confident in themselves as young adults and becoming their own person. And for me, I felt like I didn't know who I was or who I needed to be. I knew I was a sister, big sister. That was important. I knew that I was a worker, pharmacy tech, and I worked my ass off, but I didn't have an identity. So I emulated what I saw on TV. So, my wit came from Maxine Shaw, from Living Single. My style came from Joan, from Girlfriends. My sex appeal was from Apollonia, from Purple Rain. And, the attention that they were getting when they entered a room or they entered a scene. And, I wanted that, and I tried to emulate that. So I quickly became a mashup of pop culture and strong women TV leads. The problem was, while I'm still trying to figure out who I was as a young adult, I didn't know what the fuck I wanted to do with my life. So I'm in school, didn't know what I wanted to major in. I started out in education because I felt that was easy. I could be somebody's fucking teacher. I can go teach somebody's fucking kid. And then when I realized it, I really didn't want to fucking teach kids. Hell, I was tired of being a babysitter. So why the fuck would I want to go and teach kids? So I switched my major 3 times before I landed on public relations. And I honestly feel like I ran into public relations because my counselor was sick and tired of seeing me. I was sick and tired of seeing her. And so she was like, let's try this out. And it actually worked. So I focused. I had a focus. I had kind of a path. And so was working as a pharmacy tech full time. Now I have a dedicated major that I was somewhat excited about. And I was also free from my duties of babysitting. And I realized the folks that I was partying with and having a good time, them motherfuckers were graduating. So I was just lingering in life. I was just there. I had no path, no guidance, just lingering and making horrible decisions. Yeah, I was working full time. I had nothing to show for it. So the problems that I had in my life, I didn't see those on the weekly episodes, Joan and Maxine Shaw. Like, I didn't see that. And so I had to figure this shit out, and I had to do it on my own, and I didn't know how. I had to relinquish my role of a party girl because it was no longer serving me. I just wasn't going anywhere. So I did do a reset and I went back to my foundations. I spent more time with my sisters, who at this time, they were growing up. They were like in middle school and elementary, and we were bonding. And, I was working, and so I was able to like go and take them to have like sushi dinners, and we would go to movies. And although I was a poor college kid, I did work and spend my time with them and spent my money on them. To this day, they'll probably deny it, but I did, and I'll stick to that fact. But I was working hard and going to school, and I'm now back tethered to them. And again, I was working hard. So I really focused on my education, but also I wanted to show my sisters to the importance of going against the grain, disrupting the apple cart, not following the herd, being their own individual. I found that energy in ensuring that, unlike me, they knew what they wanted to be when they grew up. They understood the importance of education. They didn't squander and, piss away their time, their energy, or fuck their money. I wanted them to have a plan, but I also wanted them to be as independent as possible. So by the time they completed their sophomore year in high school, my goal was to ensure that they knew what they wanted to major in, and both of them did, and that was probably one of my proudest moments. And then the inevitable occurred. I finally graduated after so many years, so many majors. I did earn a bachelor's in public relations, and I just thought, that's it. The world is my fucking oyster. I'm going to get the fuck out of this town. I'm going to go make all kind of money. I'm going to be a pharmaceutical sales rep. I'm going to wear heels and in business suits, and I was going to try to bring back the shoulder pads because I am a true child of the 80s. I just knew I was going to do this, and the joke was on me because I knew shit about selling. I couldn't even sell myself in an interview. And so I went back to being a pharmacy tech, and I still continued to work and had nothing to show for it. And I was just fucking miserable. And then I would think, what would Maxine do? What would Apollonia do? What would Lisa Turtle do? And I had no fucking clue. But LaToya needed to get her shit together, and I needed to do so soon. So I jumped in my car, and at the time it was a green Mitsubishi Mirage. And I detethered myself from my sisters because I was not serving them. I was so miserable and unhappy because I didn't know who I was, or I wasn't becoming the person I thought I wanted to be. And so I needed to get away. And so I detethered myself. I still went home for milestones such as prom, senior trips, their high school graduations. I was still working hard and somewhat working still, for them. I wanted to give them experiences I never had. And so as I grew older, between the late 20s, early 30s, I just continued to work. I didn't have any desire to be married. Even though I was dating, I didn't want marriage. I just thought that's a lot of work. I didn't want to have kids because I felt like I just raised my children. I had 10-year age difference and a 15-year age difference between my sisters. I raised them. I babysat them so much, but I was so damn proud of them. I mean, they were doing well, but I was so overzealous with my role as a big sister that I allowed it to kind of be a supplement to motherhood. And looking back, I feel like that was so unfair to me, and I did it to myself. And so I stumbled upon a career in consulting, and I started traveling, as a single woman, living a great life. I worked, I traveled, I worked for travel. So I was in a rhythm. I got my master's, I got certified project management professional. I was climbing the corporate ladder. I was even tapping on the glass ceiling, I will say. But I worked. I didn't have any hobbies, and unless you factor in shopping, which was spending money, and eating, which was making me fat, I didn't have a fucking hobby. So I just became a supreme project manager. I was so consumed with it that even for the first couple of years of my marriage, I remember, my husband saying, hey, don't manage me. And I didn't mean to. I didn't realize I was. But, looking back, I kind of resented that. But I understand it now because, I was managing the fuck out of him. But I couldn't help it because I didn't know how to turn off work. Work was such a huge part of me. I even judged others in how they worked, because my thing is, if this is how you work, in your career and your job, then this is how you are as a person. So if you did bad business, you were a bad fucking person. To me, again, my experience. And it was because I didn't know the difference between work Toya and personal Toya. There was no such thing. So when I dealt with people who they had that balance, I looked at them differently. So I remember, thinking to myself one time, I was on a sister's trip and I didn't know who I was outside of my career. And here I am watching my sisters blossoming. They had their friends, they had their goals, they were just they knew who they were. My baby sister was like doing her hair and she had this style to her. And it's like she was just both of them, very confident in who they were. And I remember one day my younger sister, this was when I realized they detethered themselves from me, was that my baby sister told me one time, she was like, you're smothering us. You are preventing us from growing. And I was like, the fuck you mean by that? Like, I'm protecting you. I have done everything to make sure you didn't make the same mistakes I made. And she said, but you learned from those mistakes. You grew from those mistakes, and you're preventing us from doing the exact same thing. You're preventing us from learning and growing from our mistakes because we can't make any. And that's when I realized, okay, they're right. They have to figure it out, do it on their own, just as I did. And although it was hurtful at the time, it was a little stung a little bit. I realized I had to let them grow into who they were. I had to allow them to make the mistakes, whether it was with friends, whether it was school, work, they had to do it. So I conceded, and and at this time I was tired, so I was happy to concede. I was like, fuck it, that's one less thing I gotta fucking worry about. And then I met my husband, and I became a doting wife. I became who I thought not only my husband needed, but also what I needed to be a wife, how I needed our marriage to look. I cooked his favorite foods. I learned to cook his favorite foods. I supported, his goals, but I didn't even create any for myself, I tried to dress differently, but I never felt comfortable. I shopped for us, shoes, clothes, perfume, colognes. Like, I did this. I traveled to where he wanted to travel. I thought I was growing us as a unit, and that wasn't the case, because as soon as my marriage ended, like clockwork, like my mom's conversation from 15 years ago finally resonated with me. I now know how a woman can lose herself. And so now I'm like, after all these years and all of the adventures I've been on, I have to ask myself, who are you? Right? Resilient and adventurous? Yes. Brave, nurturing? Sure. Wanderlust? Oh, hell fucking yeah. What do I do? Lover of life. I love to learn, and I love to evolve. I love to travel. What are some of the things that I have to say? I say a lot. I do think I'm funny. My family, my sisters think I'm corny, but I'm real fucking funny. But most importantly, and I don't know if I should curse and then say this, but I am so freaking blessed. So who am I? What do I do? And what do I have to say? I will say is really, I have a lot. I really do. So with that, we will conclude today's podcast, and I hope that you will join me next week as I journey to the Nordics and explore the country of Sweden. But most importantly, please remember to like and subscribe so that we can continue this fun.